Los Angeles Lakers won the 2020 NBA Championship at the weekend, beating the Miami Heat to secure the title in 6 games. The Lakers had the best record in the Western Conference, but in the East, the Milwaukee Bucks and last year's champions, the Toronto Raptors, both had better regular season records than the Lakers in this COVID-shortened season. However, as the teams made their way to Florida to play out the season in the NBA bubble, the Lakers stood tall as the Bucks and Raptors fell in the playoffs, and it was the Heat that made their way through as the best from the East before falling short to the Lakers. Any championship won is special, but this one will be particularly memorable for Lakers fans and not just for the unique circumstances in which it was won. The biggest rivalry in the NBA is between the Lakers and the Boston Celtics. There's a lot of history between the franchises, and they hold the record of meetings between two teams in the NBA Finals, having gone head-to-head on 12 occasions. The Celtics have had the better of those clashes, winning 9 of the 12, and until Sunday, they also had the record for the most NBA titles with 17. At the weekend, the Lakers finally won their 17th title to go level with the Celtics. But how did we get here, and what makes this rivalry so special? The NBA's history goes back as far as 1946, when a basketball league was set up known as the Basketball Association of America. In those early days, the Celtics weren't making much of an impact, and while the Lakers were doing well, they weren't in LA, and instead it was the Minneapolis Lakers who won 5 of the first 8 championships. Once that run was over, the Celtics finally began to make an impact and finally arrived at the NBA Finals for the first time in 1957, and they would make them their home, winning the Eastern Conference in 12 of the next 13 seasons. In 1957, they won their first title beating the St. Louis Hawks before losing in the 1958 finals to the same team. In 1959, for the first time, the NBA Finals would see the Celtics take on the Lakers, although not as we know it, as at this time the Lakers were still in Minneapolis. The Celtics swept the Lakers to win their second title, so at the time there didn't seem to be much of a rivalry. The Celtics went on as they were and continued to add title after title until they were reunited with the Lakers again in 1962. Although this time they were all the way out in the West Coast in Los Angeles. The Lakers took the Celtics to 7 games, but it was the same result as before, with the Celtics taking the title, and that pattern would continue right through the 60s as the Lakers made it to the finals 6 times, and on every single trip to the finals they were defeated by the Celtics. Even when the Lakers didn't make it to the finals, the Celtics did, apart from in 1967 when the Philadelphia 76ers won the title. And by the time the Celtics beat the Lakers in 1969, they now had 11 titles, thanks mostly to their legendary centre Bill Russell, who had played on every one of those championship winning teams. The Lakers finally got their first championship in LA in 1972, which was no less than players like Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West deserved. However, they would be undone by the Celtics once again as they picked up titles 12 and 13 in 1974 and 76 respectively. The Lakers and Celtics managed to stay away from each other throughout the 1970s, but in the 1980s the Lakers managed to win 8 out of 10 Western Conference titles and the Celtics won 5 Eastern titles, so it was inevitable that the teams would collide. The Lakers won titles in 1980 and 1982, thanks to young Magic Johnson and a veteran Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, while the Celtics won the title in 1981 thanks to the likes of Larry Bird and Kevin McHale. Despite these titles early in the decade, it wasn't until 1984 that the teams would go head to head, and yet again the result went the Celtics' way, just as it had in all 7 of their previous finals meetings. In 1985 the sides would meet again in the finals, and the Lakers would finally get one over on their old rivals, winning the franchise's 9th title in 6 games. The Celtics would get back to winning ways in 1986 as the Lakers missed out in the finals, but in 1987 the rivalry was renewed once again, and the Lakers proved that they had finally broken the curse and won another title. That was the end of the road for the Celtics, as they went 20 years without a finals appearance, and while the Lakers won the 1988 title, they too wouldn't lift another title for over a decade, meaning that for the entire 1990s, the scores remained at 16-11 in favour of Boston. The 21st century started well for the Lakers, as Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal led LA to 3 titles in a row between 2000 and 2002, before the rivalry was rediscovered in the 2008 finals. Shaq was no longer in LA, but Kobe was still there, although he was unable to stop the Celtics winning their 17th title in 6 games, with Paul Pierce winning the series MVP award. The Celtics were unable to defend their title, as the Lakers won their 15th title in 2009, And then in 2010, it was time for the pride of the NBA to do battle again, as the Lakers and Celtic met in the finals for the 12th time. As always when these two meet, the series flipped from one side to another, but in the end the Lakers came back to win a tense Game 7 and with it their 16th NBA title, leaving them one behind the Celtics. Over the last decade, neither the Celtics nor the Lakers have been to the finals until this season. LeBron James's arrival in LA has seen an upturn in the Lakers' fortunes, and the team were brought closer together following the shock death of Kobe Bryant, and it gave them an added edge as they looked to pay tribute to him by winning the championship. As it was, they almost got the opportunity to renew their rivalry with the Celtics, but they fell just short in the East, losing to Miami in the conference final. Despite putting up a good fight at times, the Heat were unable to stop LA achieving what felt like their destiny this season. At 17-17, this is the first time in almost 60 years that the Lakers are at least equal to the Celtics in terms of championships. And they'll be looking to ride that momentum into Title 18 and beyond. But if NBA history tells us anything, it's that once one of these giants reaches the top, it seems to awaken something in the other. And nobody would be surprised to see the Celtics go one step further next season by reaching the NBA Finals. And it would be even less of a surprise if they were faced with the familiar purple and gold that seems to bring out the best and the worst of these old rivals.